Nestled in the heart of a suburban landscape, our neighborhood is a picture-perfect community governed by a strict homeowners association, or HOA. Lush green lawns, neatly trimmed hedges, and houses painted in soft pastels create an idyllic atmosphere that many would envy. However, beneath this polished exterior lies a rigid set of rules that dictate every aspect of life here, from the color of your front door to the acceptable height of your grass. It's a place where compliance reigns supreme, and any deviation can result in stern warnings or fines. At the center of this tightly knit community is the infamous HOA Karen. A formidable presence with a penchant for oversight, she has become synonymous with the association's stringent enforcement policies. With her watchful eye and clipboard always at hand, she prides herself on maintaining order and upholding the neighborhood standards, often at the expense of neighborly kindness. Residents whisper tales of her confrontational encounters with those who dare to stray from the established norms, making her both feared and loathed. Despite her reputation, there's an undeniable charm to our community, one that is often overshadowed by Karen's antics. While many neighbors try to coexist peacefully, the tension between personal freedom and adherence to HOA regulations is palpable. As summer approaches and life begins to flourish in our neighborhood, little did we know that Karen's obsession with control would soon culminate in an absurd incident involving packing peanuts that would disrupt not only my home, but also the delicate balance of our community. Meet Karen, the quintessential HOA enforcer and the embodiment of neighborhood vigilance. With her perfectly coiffed hair and a wardrobe that screams suburban authority, she is not just a resident. She is the self-appointed guardian of community standards. Karen possesses an unwavering belief that rules exist for a reason, and she takes her role as a watchdog very seriously. Her piercing gaze seems to scrutinize every lawn, mailbox, and flower bed, always on the lookout for any hint of noncompliance. Karen's personality is a complex blend of tenacity and anxiety. On one hand, she is fiercely passionate about maintaining the neighborhood's aesthetic. On the other, her overzealousness often leads to conflict. Residents have learned to tread lightly around her, as she has a reputation for initiating confrontations over the most minor infractions, whether it's a fence painted the wrong shade or a garden decoration deemed too gaudy. What started as innocent disagreements have escalated into full-blown disputes, leaving many neighbors exasperated and eager to avoid her at all costs. Over the years, Karen has amassed a collection of enemies within the community. Her relentless enforcement of HOA regulations has turned what could be simple neighborly exchanges into tense standoffs. Tales of her confrontations circulate at block parties, often accompanied by eye rolls and knowing glances. Despite her unyielding demeanor, there's an undeniable sense of humor in how residents have learned to cope with her antics. Little did we know that Karen's fixation on order would soon lead to an unexpected and chaotic turn of events that would impact my life directly. As summer settled in, the neighborhood buzzed with activity, but an undercurrent of tension simmered just beneath the surface. My interactions with Karen had grown increasingly fraught over the past few months. It all started when I decided to add a whimsical garden gnome to my flower bed, a harmless nod to my love for quirky decor. Little did I know, this seemingly innocent addition would ignite a firestorm of discontent. Karen wasted no time issuing a formal complaint, citing a violation of HOA decorum. Her stern letter was laced with passive-aggressive remarks about maintaining property values. I brushed it off initially, thinking it was just another one of her overreactions, but the confrontation that followed was anything but trivial. When I confronted her about the letter at the next HOA meeting, tensions escalated quickly. She dismissed my attempts at humor and insisted on discussing my offensive gnome in front of other residents. The embarrassment was palpable, and it solidified my resolve to stand my ground. From that point on, our relationship soured further. Each interaction felt charged with animosity. Every minor infraction was scrutinized under her watchful eye. The gnome incident became a point of contention that lingered like a dark cloud over our exchanges. As the summer wore on, I could sense that Karen's frustration with me was growing. It wasn't long before her pent-up anger would manifest in a way I could never have anticipated, a chaotic act of retribution that would fill my home with packing peanuts and set off a series of events that would change everything. It was an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon when the chaos began. I returned home from work, tired but eager to unwind. As I opened the front door, a sudden whoosh greeted me, followed by an avalanche of packing peanuts spilling out of my entryway like a chaotic snowstorm. The sight was utterly surreal. My living room, once a cozy refuge, was now engulfed in a sea of white foam, cascading over furniture and spilling onto the floor. Confusion quickly turned to disbelief as I took in the scene. How could this have happened? My heart raced as I stumbled back, stepping into the maddening mess. The packing peanuts were everywhere, floating in the air like confetti, clinging to my clothes, and even filling up my shoes. I felt an immediate sense of panic wash over me. It was as if my home had been transformed into a bizarre art installation gone wrong. As I stood there in shock, I noticed a note precariously perched on top of the mound. With trembling hands, I picked it up to read Karen's unmistakable handwriting. Hope you enjoy your new decor. Maybe this will teach you about community standards. The message dripped with sarcasm and malice, confirming my worst fears that she was behind this absurd act of vandalism. In that moment, emotions flooded through me: anger, embarrassment, and a touch of absurdity. How had things escalated so dramatically? I couldn't fathom how someone could stoop so low. It was clear that this wasn't just about packing peanuts. It was about a personal vendetta that had reached its peak, thrusting me into a messy situation that would require far more than just a broom to resolve. The aftermath of the packing peanuts invasion was nothing short of overwhelming. As I stood in the chaos, it became painfully clear that my once inviting home had transformed into a disarrayed disaster zone. Every inch of my living room was blanketed in the lightweight foam, creating a surreal landscape that felt more like a prank than reality. I felt an immediate sense of dread wash over me. This mess would require hours, if not days, of painstaking cleanup. The first task was simply to assess the damage. Packing peanuts had infiltrated every nook and cranny, underneath the couch cushions, in the corners of the room, and even scattered throughout the hallway. My heart sank with each new discovery. The emotional toll was heavy. I felt violated and frustrated by the sheer absurdity of the situation. What should have been a peaceful evening turned into a frantic effort to reclaim my home. Physically, the cleanup was grueling. Armed with a vacuum and garbage bags, I began the arduous process of gathering up the packing peanuts. Each scoop seemed futile as they floated and scattered whenever I moved. It felt like trying to contain a wild storm with bare hands. A few hours in, my back ached, and my patience was wearing thin. The once simple task of tidying up had transformed into a marathon of frustration. As evening fell, I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted and surrounded by remnants of Karen's antics. The emotional weight lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that my home had been violated, not just by packing peanuts, but by someone who clearly had taken their obsession with community standards too far. Little did I know, this chaotic episode would only be the beginning of an unexpected journey toward resolution. After a long night of cleaning, I knew I couldn't avoid confronting Karen any longer. My emotions were a tangled mess of anger and confusion as I marched over to her house, determination fueling my steps. I knocked on her door, and when she answered, the smug look on her face made my blood boil. It was as if she relished the chaos she had created. "What do you want?" she asked, feigning innocence but unable to hide the slight smirk that tugged at her lips. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before confronting her directly. "You know exactly why I'm here," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "The packing peanuts. This has to stop." Her expression shifted slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "Oh, come now," she said with feigned lightness. "It was just a little fun. Surely you can appreciate a good joke." The dismissive tone in her voice only fueled my frustration. "This isn't a joke, Karen. You vandalized my home." I shot back, feeling a mix of indignation and disbelief. She shrugged, as if to suggest that my feelings were trivial compared to her warped sense of community justice. "If you had just followed the rules, we wouldn't be in this situation," she retorted, twisting the narrative in an attempt to justify her actions. I felt my heart race as I realized how deeply entrenched her mindset was. The encounter made it clear that no amount of reasoning would penetrate her stubbornness. Instead of fear or intimidation, an unexpected resolve began to rise within me. I wouldn't let her antics define my experience in this community any longer. This confrontation was just the beginning of a battle that would require more than mere words to resolve. The packing peanuts incident sent shockwaves through our community, and the reactions from my neighbors were mixed, to say the least. Some residents were quick to rally around me, offering their support and empathizing with my ordeal. "That's just classic Karen," one neighbor said, shaking their head in disbelief. "You're not alone. She's done similar things before." This camaraderie provided a much-needed sense of validation amidst the chaos, as I realized I wasn't the only one who had felt the weight of Karen's heavy-handedness. However, not everyone shared this sentiment. A handful of residents defended Karen, insisting that her intentions were misunderstood and that she was simply trying to uphold community standards. "Maybe you should have followed the rules more closely," one neighbor suggested with a disapproving tone. Their dismissal of my experience stung, as it seemed to trivialize the invasion of my personal space. The HOA's response was predictably tepid. When I brought the issue to their attention, they issued a statement reminding residents to maintain decorum without directly addressing the incident itself. Their lack of action felt frustrating and disheartening, leaving me questioning whether they truly had the community's best interests at heart. It became apparent that Karen's influence within the HOA created a protective bubble around her actions, making it difficult for anyone to confront her directly. Despite this, some residents began to voice their dissatisfaction with Karen's tactics. Whispers of organizing a community meeting circulated, suggesting that perhaps it was time to address the elephant in the room. As I navigated this complex web of support and dissent, I realized that this was about more than just packing peanuts. It was about reclaiming our sense of community from an overzealous enforcer who had long overstayed her welcome. As the fallout from the packing peanuts incident continued to unfold, I began to consider the legal implications of Karen's actions. Her blatant disregard for my personal property raised questions about liability and potential damages. In a community governed by an HOA, one would assume there were safeguards against such behavior, but the reality was murky at best. I consulted with a local attorney who specialized in HOA-related issues. She explained that while neighbors have a right to express grievances, Karen's actions went beyond acceptable boundaries. Vandalism, even when cloaked as a misguided attempt at community enforcement, could lead to significant repercussions. The attorney highlighted that Karen could be held liable for damages resulting from her antics, especially since her actions were premeditated and malicious. Moreover, I learned that the HOA itself could bear some responsibility for failing to adequately address Karen's behavior. Many homeowners associations have insurance policies that cover liabilities arising from members' actions. If it could be proven that the HOA had neglected its duty to maintain a safe and respectful community environment, they might also face legal issues. Armed with this knowledge, I began to weigh my options. Should I file a formal complaint against Karen or pursue mediation through the HOA? The thought of taking such action felt daunting but necessary. I wanted to ensure that not only would I be compensated for the cleanup costs, but also that Karen would understand the consequences of her actions. This incident had escalated into a legal matter, one that could potentially reshape our entire community dynamic and hold both Karen and the HOA accountable for what had transpired. The cleanup process after the packing peanuts invasion was nothing short of a Herculean task. I had no idea just how much physical labor awaited me, and as I stood in the middle of my living room, the sheer volume of foam seemed insurmountable. Armed with a vacuum cleaner and a few garbage bags, I set to work, determined to reclaim my space. Initially, I thought a simple vacuuming would do the trick, but I quickly learned that the packing peanuts had an uncanny ability to float away at the slightest disturbance. As I maneuvered around the room, they seemed to multiply, scattering into every corner. At one point, I tripped over a stray clump and stumbled forward, sending a fresh wave of peanuts billowing into the air like an explosion. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Here I was, navigating a storm of packing peanuts in my own home. After several hours of relentless effort, my back began to ache and my patience wore thin. Just when I thought I was making progress, I discovered that packing peanuts had sneaked their way into my kitchen. I opened a cabinet only to be greeted by a cascade of foam spilling out like an uninvited guest. It felt like a slapstick comedy scene from a movie. Despite the challenges, there were moments of levity along the way. A neighbor dropped by to check on me and ended up joining in on the cleanup. We shared stories and joked about Karen's antics as we worked together, turning what could have been a miserable experience into something surprisingly enjoyable. By the end of the day, we had not only cleared out the packing peanuts but also forged a deeper sense of community among ourselves, a small silver lining amid the chaos. As I stood in my now-clean living room, I couldn't help but reflect on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded. The packing peanuts incident had been ridiculous and frustrating, but it also served as a catalyst for deeper insights about community dynamics. What started as an infuriating act of vandalism morphed into a lesson about resilience, support, and the importance of standing up for oneself. Through the chaos, I learned that community isn't just about shared spaces, it's about shared values and mutual respect. While Karen's actions had initially isolated me, they also prompted an unexpected sense of solidarity among my neighbors. Many residents who had once kept their heads down began to speak up, fostering an environment where we could collectively address grievances rather than allowing one person's overreach to dominate our interactions. It was a reminder that even in a tightly knit community governed by strict rules, there is room for compassion and understanding. My perception of the HOA shifted as well. Initially, I saw it as a rigid body enforcing arbitrary regulations, but I began to recognize the potential for positive change within its framework. The incident sparked conversations among residents about holding the association accountable for its members' actions and ensuring that everyone felt safe and respected in their own homes. Ultimately, this experience taught me the value of advocacy and the importance of finding my voice within the community. While I still held reservations about Karen's influence, I now understood that real power lies in collective action. As I moved forward, I felt more empowered to engage with my neighbors and shape our environment into one that reflected our shared vision, a place where kindness and understanding could flourish alongside the rules. As I settled onto my couch, finally free from the chaos of packing peanuts, I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Who would have thought that a simple garden gnome could spark such a ridiculous series of events? Here I was, a victim of packing peanut warfare, and yet somehow I had emerged with a newfound sense of community and camaraderie. It was almost comical to think that my home had turned into a foam-filled battleground. Looking ahead, I realized that interactions with Karen were far from over. The HOA meeting loomed on the horizon, and I could already picture her perched at the front, clipboard in hand, ready to critique every detail of our neighborhood's decorum. But this time, I felt ready to engage, not with fear or apprehension, but with a sense of purpose. If anything, the packing peanuts incident had ignited a fire within me to advocate for a more balanced approach to community living. I couldn't shake the feeling that this saga would become legendary within our neighborhood, one that future residents would recount with laughter and disbelief. Remember when Karen filled that poor guy's house with packing peanuts? They'd say, shaking their heads in astonishment. Who knew vandalism could lead to such bonding moments? As I prepared for what lay ahead, I realized life in this HOA might always be a bit theatrical, filled with quirky characters and unexpected twists. But if there was one thing I learned through the packing peanut fiasco, it was that humor and resilience would win out in the end. And so, armed with a sense of determination and a lighter heart, I embraced whatever adventures awaited me next in this wonderfully chaotic community.